Thanksgiving was supposed to be harmless, just warm light and everyone pretending the past had manners. So I waited until mouths were full to ask one simple question about my surgery date. My dad answered like it was a receipt for groceries. In that instant, I realized my family hadn't just stolen $40,000. They had stolen time, because the letter really was sent last week, but what they did with it made the rest of my life a courtroom. My name is Chloe Green, and I am 34 years old. I have spent the last decade perfecting the art of being invisible in a room full of people who demand to be seen, standing on the porch of the rental house in Briar Ridge, Pennsylvania. I took a breath of air that tasted like wood smoke and expensive isolation. The house was a sprawling A-frame with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a black, frozen lake. It was the kind of place my father, Grant, rented to prove he was still a captain of industry, even though his industry had been sinking for 5 years. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of the front door. I adjusted my scarf to hide the slight tremor in my neck, a symptom that had been getting worse over the last 6 months. I pulled the corners of my mouth up. I widened my eyes. I rehearsed the good daughter smile. It was a muscle memory by now, a reflex I triggered whenever I was within 50 feet of my father. I was here to play a role. I was the reliable one, the solvent one, the one who did not make a scene. I opened the door and walked into the warmth. The interior was staged like a catalog for a life nobody actually lived. There were beige linens, oversized candles that smelled of artificial pine, and a fire cracking too perfectly in the stone hearth. My family was already positioned around the dining table like actors waiting for a director to call action. Grant stood at the head of the table, carving a turkey with the precise, violent grace he usually reserved for boardroom negotiations. My stepmother, Marla, was fluttering around him, adjusting forks that were already straight and laughing at jokes he had not made. And there was my brother, Dylan. He sat slumped in his chair, staring at his phone, his face bathed in the blue light of a screen he seemed to value more than the people around him. I walked to my seat. The floorboards were silent. "You made good time," Grant said without looking up. The knife sliced through the meat. Clean, effortless. I drove straight through. I said, my voice sounded thin, absorbed instantly by the high ceilings. Marla looked up, her eyes bright and frantic. "Chloe, you look tired. Are you eating enough? You look pale." "I am fine, Marla. Just working a lot." I sat down. The china was heavy, cold against my fingertips. I unfolded the linen napkin and placed it over my lap. My hands were trembling under the table. I clasped them together, squeezing until my knuckles turned white, forcing them to be still. I needed to get through dinner. I needed to wait until they were fed, until the wine had softened the edges of their narcissism. The dinner began with the usual choreography. Grant dominated the conversation, talking about market trends and a potential merger that I knew was pure fiction. Marla nodded and gasped at the right intervals. Dylan picked at his food, his eyes darting around the room as if he were looking for an exit. I watched them. I watched how they ate. Grant ate with entitlement, chewing slowly, savoring the fact that he was the provider of this feast, even though I knew I would likely be Venmoing Marla for the grocery bill later. Marla ate nervously, small bites, checking her lipstick on the glass rim after every sip of wine. Dylan barely ate at all. He looked sick. His skin had a gray, clammy cast to it, and his hands, when he reached for the salt, shook worse than mine. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, followed immediately by a wave of nausea. I knew what was wrong with him because I had paid for the tests he refused to acknowledge. I knew his body was failing in the same way mine was starting to, only he was sprinting toward the cliff while I was trying to build a bridge over it. The conversation shifted to the holidays. Marla talked about a ski trip she wanted to book for February. Grant talked about upgrading the lease on his SUV. They were spending money they did not have, in a house they did not own, eating food cooked by a woman who was terrified of silence. I waited. I waited until the turkey was mostly gone. I waited until Grant poured his third glass of Cabernet. I waited until the heavy, satiated silence of the main course settled over the table. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, and set it down. The sound of the glass hitting the coaster was the only noise in the room. Did the hospital mail the surgery date? I asked. I kept my voice gentle. I did not make it an accusation. I made it a housekeeping question, like asking if the gardener had come or if the trash had been collected. Grant did not stop eating. He cut a piece of stuffing, forked it, and brought it to his mouth. He chewed, swallowed, and dabbed the corner of his mouth with his napkin. "It came last week," he said. My heart hammered against my ribs. It came. It was real. The date was set. I felt a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I could finally plan. I could tell Dr. Vale. I could stop the tremors before they became seizures. "Okay," I said, exhaling. "When is it? I need to let my work know so I can file for the leave." Grant reached for the wine bottle. He poured a splash into Marla's glass, then topped off his own. He set the bottle down with a heavy thud. "We are not doing that right now. Chloe." I blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The surgery," he said. He spoke casually, as if discussing a change in the weather. We had to make a pivot. Strategic reallocation. I went very still. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "What do you mean?" "Reallocation?" I asked. My voice was very quiet. "Dylan has a big opportunity." Marla chimed in. Her voice was high, breathless. "A rebrand. It is huge. Chloe, Silverlark Productions. They are going to film a documentary-style launch. It is going to put him on the map." I looked at Dylan. He was staring at his plate, pushing a pea around in a circle with his fork. He refused to meet my eyes. I looked back at my father. "The money in the Harborstone account." I said, "The money I deposited. The money strictly for the medical copay and the surgeon's retainer." Grant waved a hand in the air. A gesture of dismissal. "It is all one pot. Chloe, family funds. We needed liquidity for the deposit on the production crew. You know how these vendors are. They want cash up front. We will replace it after the launch. Dylan is projected to triple his engagement numbers by January." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It started in my sternum and radiated out to my fingertips. It was not anger. It was something much worse. It was clarity. They had not borrowed the money. You do not borrow $40,000 without asking. You steal it. I looked at the centerpiece, a cornucopia of wax fruit and dried flowers. I focused on a fake red apple. I needed to anchor myself to something physical because the room was starting to tilt. That money was in a medical escrow. I said, "I set it up specifically so this would not happen." "Well," Grant said, taking a sip of wine, "it is a good thing you put us down as trusted contacts." Marla handled the transfer. Very efficient. Marla smiled. A reflex that didn't reach her eyes. It was an emergency. "Chloe, you know how hard it is to book Silverlark? We had to move fast." I looked at them. I really looked at them. I saw the gold watch on Grant's wrist. I saw the diamond studs in Marla's ears. I saw the designer hoodie Dylan was wearing. I set my fork down slowly. I placed it perfectly parallel to my knife. "So," I said, "you still don't know who really needs the surgery." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the comfortable silence of before. It was a vacuum. Marla froze with the gravy boat suspended over her potatoes. The brown liquid dripped onto the white tablecloth, a slow, dark stain spreading on the linen. She didn't move to wipe it up. Dylan stopped pushing the pea. He hunched his shoulders up, trying to make himself small, trying to disappear inside his expensive clothes. Grant stopped chewing. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time since I arrived. His eyes were cold, flat, and entirely unrepentant. "You are being dramatic." "Chloe," Grant said, "you always do this. You make everything a tragedy." I did not answer. I pushed my chair back. The wood scraped against the floor, a harsh, grating sound that made Marla flinch. "Where are you going?" Marla asked, her voice trembling. "We have pumpkin pie." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. I did not look at them. I walked out of the dining room. I walked through the living room with the perfect fire. I walked up the stairs. my hand gripping the banister. My hand was shaking. I reached the guest bedroom, my old room, or the simulation of it. I closed the door but did not lock it yet. I sat on the edge of the bed. It was too soft. Everything in this house was too soft. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers fumbled with the passcode. I opened the banking app. I tapped on the Harborstone Health Trust account. I stared at the screen. I expected to see a low balance. I expected to see maybe $500 left, or perhaps a pending transaction that I could contest. Balance, $0.00. It was wiped clean. I scrolled down to the transaction history. One single disbursement, wire transfer, November 24th, 3 days ago. I clicked on the details. Authorized by verified contact. Confirmation sent via email. I sat there, staring at the numbers. 0.00. This was not a mistake. This was not a desperate family grabbing cash for a bail bond or a life-saving procedure. This was precision. Someone had logged in, navigated the security protocols, impersonated my approval, and drained every cent I had saved to keep my spine from collapsing. They had planned this. While I was working double shifts, while I was sitting in MRI tubes, listening to the machine bang like a hammer against my skull, while I was driving through the night to get here for Thanksgiving, they were planning the launch party. I heard the clink of silverware from downstairs. I listened. I could hear the low murmur of Grant's voice, then Marla's laugh. It was a little shrill, a little forced, but it was there. They were still eating. They had just told me that my health, my mobility, my future was worth less than a drone shot for my brother's Instagram reel, and they were still eating. They were not evil in the way villains are in movies. They didn't have a grand plan to destroy me. It was worse than that. They just didn't care. They were comfortable. They felt entitled to my survival. They viewed me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a resource, a battery to be drained until it was dead, and then discarded. I looked at the phone again. 0. I felt the tears prick the back of my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I swallowed them. I turned them into something else. I turned them into fuel. I stood up and walked to the door. I turned the lock. The click was loud in the quiet room. It sounded like a gunshot. I walked back to the bed and sat down. I looked at the black lake outside the window. The ice was thick. It looked unbreakable. I took a deep breath. Okay. I whispered to the empty room. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The good daughter was gone. The smile was gone. Then we are doing this the hard way. To understand why I sat in that frozen guest room staring at a zero balance, you have to understand that the surgery was never for me. My spine is fine. My nerves are firing exactly as they should. The tragedy is that I spent a year convincing my family I was the one falling apart because I knew it was the only way to save the one person they would undoubtedly destroy. It started 11 months ago in Ravenswood. It was mid-January, the kind of Chicago winter that hurts your face, and Dylan had crashed on my couch after what he called a work trip. In reality, it was a brand activation event for a sparkling water company that wanted to pivot to the extreme sports demographic. Dylan did not do extreme sports. Dylan did extreme socializing. He was sleeping on my vintage velvet sofa, wrapped in a duvet I had bought for guests I rarely had. When he woke up, the morning light was hitting him hard. He looked gray, not the gray of a hangover, which I had seen on him 1,000 times, but the gray of a system shutting down. I was in the kitchen making coffee. I watched him try to pick up his phone to check his notifications. It was a reflex for him. The first breath of his day. His hand hovered over the device on the coffee table. He reached for it, and his fingers spasmed. It was a violent, jerky twitch, like a marionette with a tangled string. He missed the phone entirely. He laughed. It was a hollow, practice sound. Need to lay off the espresso, he mumbled, rubbing his wrist. He tried again. This time he grabbed the phone, but his grip was weak. He had to use 2 hands to bring it to his face. I walked over and set a mug of black coffee down on the coaster. I watched him reach for the handle. His index finger hooked through the loop, but his thumb could not clamp down. The mug tilted. Hot coffee splashed over the rim, scalding his knuckles and staining the rug. "Damn it," he hissed. He pulled his hand back, cradling it against his chest. "Let me see." I said, "It is nothing. Chloe, just slept on it wrong. My arm is asleep." I ignored him. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. I pressed my thumb into his palm and asked him to squeeze. He squeezed. It felt like a handshake from a child. There was no resistance, no strength. And then came the tremor, a rhythmic, rolling shake that traveled up his forearm and disappeared under the sleeve of his expensive hoodie. "This is not a sleeping arm." "Dylan," he pulled his hand away. "Stop it. I am fine. I have an unboxing video to shoot in an hour." He stood up, swayed, and had to grab the back of the sofa to stay upright. That was the moment I knew he was dying. I did not know the medical term yet, but I knew the look. It was the look of a car running on fumes a mile past the empty gauge. I made the call an hour later. "Doctor." Owen Vale was the only person in the world I trusted with the truth. Mostly because he had already seen me at my worst during our breakup 3 years ago and had never used it against me. He was an attending neurologist at Northline Medical Center now. When I called him, his voice was professional, but I could hear the hesitation. We had not spoken in 6 months. I brought Dylan in through the loading dock entrance. I told Dylan we were going for a vitamin drip, a lie he accepted because it fit his narrative of wellness maintenance. But when the elevator opened onto the neurology floor, he went quiet. Owen met us in a private consult room. He didn't do the small talk. He ran the tests. He did the conduction studies. He ordered the imaging. 3 hours later, while Dylan was in the cafeteria flirting with a nurse to distract himself, Owen put the scans up on the light board. He pointed to a cluster of shadows near the cervical spine. "It is an aggressive neurological compression," Owen said. He used a pen to trace the narrowing of the canal. "See this? It is pinching the cord. That is why he is losing grip strength. That is why he has the tremors. If we do not decompress this within the next 4 to 6 months, the damage becomes permanent. We are talking paralysis. Chloe, loss of motor function in the hands first, then the legs." I stared at the black and white image of my brother's interior. It looked so fragile. "Can you fix it?" I asked. "We can," Owen said, "but it is delicate. We need a specialized team, and we need to book the operating room now because the schedule is packed." I looked through the glass window of the door. I could see Dylan laughing, holding a bottle of water. He dropped the cap. He tried to pick it up and failed. He kicked it under the table instead, pretending he meant to do it. "He will not do it," I said. Owen looked at me. "Chloe, he has to. You do not know my father." I said, "If Grant finds out Dylan has a degenerate condition, he will look at him like he is a broken investment. He will say Dylan is weak. He will talk about genetics and fortitude. And Marla? Marla will tell the neighbors. She will make it a prayer circle drama. Dylan will be so humiliated he will refuse the surgery just to prove them wrong. He will wait until he falls down and cannot get up." "Then what do you want to do?" Owen asked. I took a deep breath. The plan formed in my head instantly. Complete and terrible. "Put the file in my name," I said. Owen dropped his pen. "Absolutely not. That is fraud." "Chloe, not the medical file," I said. "The billing, the scheduling, the narrative. I will tell them it is me. I will tell Grant and Marla that I found a congenital issue. They already think I am the fragile one because I have allergies and I read books instead of networking. They will believe it." "Why would you do that?" "Because if it is me, they will not ask questions. They will write a check for the flowers and send a card, but they will stay out of the way. If it is me, I can control the money. I can make sure the surgeon gets paid. I can drag Dylan to the hospital on the day of the operation and tell him it is a spa retreat until they put the anesthesia mask on his face." Owen looked at me for a long time. "You are enabling them," he said quietly. "I am saving him." I corrected. I spent the next week building the architecture of the lie. I needed a place to put the money that was separate from my personal accounts, a place that felt official and untouchable. I created the Harborstone Health Trust. It sounds impressive, doesn't it? It sounds like an institution. It was just a savings account with a scary name. I started funneling money into it. I took a second contract consulting for a logistics firm in Ohio. I stopped eating out. I canceled my streaming services. I moved into a smaller apartment in a rougher part of town. Every dollar I didn't spend went straight into Harborstone. I needed $40,000, enough to cover the surgical retainer, the anesthesiologist, the hospital facility fee, and the post-op rehabilitation that insurance would almost certainly try to dispute. I told the family in February. I did it over a Zoom call because I couldn't stand the idea of sitting across from my father and having to keep my face steady while I lied. I said, I might need surgery. I kept it vague. I mentioned something about spinal stability. I watched the relief flicker across Grant's face. Relief that it was me, the expendable child, and not Dylan, the golden boy. Marla put on a sorrowful expression and asked if I needed a casserole dropped off. Dylan just blinked, like he didn't know where to put the information. He texted me later. You good? I texted back, fine, just maintenance. But this is where I messed up. This is where I gave them an opening and made it easy. I travel for work. I'm on the road 3 weeks out of 4. I knew that when the hospital sent the official scheduling notice, the letter that would demand the final deposit, I might be in a hotel room in Akron or a conference center in Detroit. I could not risk the letter sitting in my mailbox in Ravenswood, buried under flyers, while the surgical window closed. So I set the mailing address to the house in Briar Ridge, Grant's house, the permanent address, the address that never changed. I thought it was safe. I thought, they are my parents. They are narcissists. But they are not thieves. And then, the bank required a protocol for the trust. If I was incapacitated, if I was, say, under anesthesia or in a coma, someone needed to be able to authorize payments. It was a standard safety feature. I sat in the bank branch in Chicago, the pen hovering over the form. Trusted Contact 1, Grant Green. Trusted Contact 2, Marla Green. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I was building a safety net. I imagined a scenario where I was unreachable, and the hospital needed confirmation, and my father would step up. I imagined him saying, "Of course, save my daughter." I did not imagine the other scenario. I did not imagine that the letter would arrive at Briar Ridge, and Grant would open it. I did not imagine he would see the date and the amount. I did not imagine that Marla would look at that number, $40,000, and not see a spinal fusion. But a launch party, I did not imagine that my brother, whose hands I was trying to stop from shaking, would stand in a room full of neon lights and drink champagne bought with the money meant to save his nervous system. I thought I was the architect of a rescue mission. I did not realize I was just the architect of a slush fund. I walked out of the bank that day feeling virtuous. I felt like the strong sister. I felt like the martyr who would never be thanked. I carried that feeling for months. I carried it right up until the moment I sat at the Thanksgiving table and watched my father cut a turkey with a steady hand. While mine shook under the table, not from disease, but from the realization that I had been played. The surgery was never mine, but the bill was all mine. And as I sat in the guest room, 11 months later, listening to the silence of the snow falling on the lake, I realized the most painful part wasn't the theft. It was the fact that I had designed the heist for them. I had given them the blueprints, unlocked the window, and disabled the alarm. All they had to do was walk in and take it, and they did. Without a moment of hesitation, I closed my eyes and pictured Dylan's hand trembling over the coffee mug. I wondered if it was worse now. I wondered if he dropped his glass of champagne at the launch party. I wondered if they used my money to buy him a straw so he wouldn't spill his drink on his rented tuxedo. The thought made me open my eyes. The sadness evaporated. The guilt evaporated. All that was left was the cold. I picked up my phone again. I wasn't calling Owen this time. I wasn't calling the hospital. I was calling the bank. And then, I was calling a lawyer. Because if they wanted to treat my life like a business transaction, I was going to make sure they audited the books. The sun came up over Briar Ridge like a bruise, purple and cold. I had not slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, listening to the heavy, wine-soaked breathing of my family in the rooms down the hall. They slept the sleep of the innocent, or the completely remorseless. I was up and dressed by 6 in the morning. I sat in my rental car with the engine running, blasting the heat to thaw my fingers. I needed to be outside their walls. I needed a signal that didn't bounce off their router. I needed to speak to the one man who could explain how my life had been dismantled with a single wire transfer. I waited until 8 o'clock Central Time. I knew Elliot Kane would be at his desk. He was a private banker of the old school variety, the kind who wore cufflinks and answered his own direct line. I dialed. The ringtone purred twice. "Elliot Kane," he answered. His voice was crisp, caffeinated. "Elliot, it is Chloe Green." There was a pause. It was not a long pause, but it was heavy. It was the sound of a man readjusting his tie because he knows a difficult conversation has just walked through the door. "Chloe," he said. His tone shifted down a register. "I was going to call you today. I saw the alert on the Harborstone account this morning. I gripped the steering wheel. The leather was freezing. Tell me what happened." "Elliot, just the mechanics. How did it move? I needed the procedure. I did not want sympathy. Sympathy is useless in a forensic audit." Elliot cleared his throat. I heard the click of a mouse. "We received a request on Tuesday morning." He said, "Urgent disbursement." The request came through the primary channel, but it was flagged for voice verification because of the amount. "We called your number on file. It went straight to voicemail." "I was in a workshop." I said, "My phone was in a locker." "Right," Elliot said. "Standard protocol dictates we wait for a call back." But 20 minutes later, we received an inbound call from your trusted contact, Marla Green. I closed my eyes. I could imagine Marla's voice. I could hear the exact pitch of frantic concern she would use. "She said there was a medical emergency." Elliot continued. "She said you were incapacitated. She used the word unreachable. She claimed the facility required immediate proof of funds to proceed with a time-sensitive procedure." The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. They had used the exact scenario I had invented to protect Dylan, the time-sensitive surgical window, to rob me. They had taken my lie and weaponized it. "But you need my signature," I said, "or my digital approval. Marla cannot just talk money out of the vault. That is where it gets complicated." Elliot said, "And this is why I was going to call you. We told her we needed written authorization from the primary account holder, or a power of attorney. She said you were lucid enough to email but not to talk." 10 minutes later, we received the confirmation email. "From me?" I asked. "From you." He said, "It came from your personal address. It had the correct subject line headers. The syntax was yours. Chloe, short, professional." It said, "Please expedite transfer to vendor immediately. Medical urgency confirmed. Authorization attached." It even had your digital signature block. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Send it to me, Elliot, now." I heard the whoosh of the sent mail before he even confirmed it. I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened my email app. There it was, a forwarded message. From Chloe Green, Consultingsmail. Com, to Elliot Kane. Subject, urgent, Harborstone disbursement authorization. I stared at the sender field. At first glance, it looked perfect. My name, my domain. But then I looked closer. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. Green with 2 N's. It was not Chloe Green. It was Chloe Green. It was a burner account, a duplicate. This was not a crime of opportunity. You do not accidentally create a spoof email address that mimics your daughter's professional identity down to the font choice in the signature block. This took time. This took study. Someone had to look at my previous emails, copy the layout, analyze my sentence structure, and register a domain that would pass a quick glance from a busy banker. It was not Marla. Marla could not convert a PDF. Grant. It had to be Grant. He was the one who taught me how to write a business letter. He was the one who told me that brevity was power. He had used my own voice against me. "Elliot," I said, bringing the phone back to my ear. That is not my email address. Look at the spelling. I heard him typing, then a sharp intake of breath. My God, he whispered. It has an extra N. It is a forgery. Elliot, it is identity theft. Where did the money go? I need to trace the routing number, he said. Hold on. I waited. Outside the car, a squirrel ran across the frozen driveway. It stopped and looked at me, twitching. I felt a strange kinship with it. We were both small things in a world of predators. Okay, Elliot said. His voice was all business now. The wire went out to a business account. It is not a hospital. Chloe, it is not a medical facility. Who is it? Silver Lark Productions, he said, located in Crescent Mesa, New Mexico. I wrote the name on the back of a gas receipt I found in the cup holder. Silver Lark Productions. Do you have the invoice? I asked. If they sent a wire, they had to attach an invoice to justify the amount to the bank's fraud department. Yes, Elliot said. It is attached to the authorization. Do you want me to read it? Read it. Item 1, he said. Venue buyout. The Mesa Loft. $6,000. Item 2, lighting rig and projection mapping. $8,000. Item 3, branded neon signage. Custom fabrication. $4,500. He paused. Go on, I said. Item 4, he said, his voice dropping. Talent fees. Influencer appearance retainers. $12,000. Item 5, luxury transport deposits. Sprinter vans and vintage convertible rental. $2,000. The list went on. Catering, drone operators, a post-production editing suite. There was no surgery. There was no doctor. My spine, Dylan's spine, the future of his nervous system, it had all been converted into neon lights and rented friends. Freeze it, I said. I cannot. Chloe. The funds cleared yesterday. They are gone. I know they are gone. I said, I mean the account. Lock it down. No one touches the zero. I want the record preserved exactly as it is. I am going to need it. I hung up. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the smell of stale coffee and heater dust. I looked at the house. I could see movement in the kitchen window now. Marla was up. She was probably making coffee, perhaps thinking about leftovers. I unlocked my phone and opened Instagram. I did not follow Dylan. I had muted him years ago because watching his life was like watching a car crash in slow motion. But I knew his handle. Everyone knew his handle. I typed it in. His profile loaded. The first thing I saw was a new highlight reel. The title was Rebirth. I tapped it. Music exploded from my phone speakers, a heavy bass-boosted track that rattled the plastic casing. The video was slick. It was professional. It started with a drone shot sweeping over a desert landscape at sunset, the red rocks of New Mexico glowing like fire. Then it cut to a warehouse space with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. There was a champagne wall, rows and rows of glasses filled with gold liquid, backlit by LEDs. There was a neon sign buzzing on the wall. Dylan Green, the next phase. And there was Dylan. He was wearing a tuxedo jacket with no shirt underneath. He was holding a microphone. He looked manic. He was laughing, pointing at the camera, grabbing the shoulder of a girl with pink hair, who I recognized as a TikTok dancer with 3 million followers. The camera zoomed in on his face. He didn't look sick. He looked high on adrenaline. But then, for a split second, the editor had missed something. Dylan reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. His hand wavered. He had to stabilize his right hand with his left, just to lift the glass. He threw his head back and laughed to cover the fumble. But I saw it. I saw the tremor. I watched the rest of the story. There were speeches. There was Grant, holding a glass up, looking like a proud patriarch. There was Marla, wearing a dress that was too young for her, hugging the influencers. They were all there. They were all complicit. I closed Instagram and opened the family group chat. I had muted this too, burying it at the bottom of my message list. I scrolled back. Tuesday, there it was, a screenshot of a bank transfer confirmation, and below it, a message from Dylan. Funds cleared. We are doing this big. Grant had replied with a thumbs up emoji. Marla had replied, "So proud of you. Honey, you deserve this." I stared at the screen. You deserve this. He deserved my health insurance? He deserved the money I had scraped together by eating instant oatmeal and working 80-hour weeks? I took a screenshot of the chat. Then I took a screenshot of the fake email Elliot had sent me. Then I took a screenshot of the Silver Lark invoice details. I created a new folder on my phone. I named it Evidence. This was not a mistake. They hadn't panicked. They hadn't acted on impulse. They had treated my bank account like a venture capital fund for Dylan's vanity. They had drafted a business plan. They had executed a hostile takeover of my identity. I looked at the timestamps. The email from Chloe Green was sent at 10:14 in the morning on Tuesday. At 10:14 on Tuesday, I was in a clean room facility in Columbus, presenting a compliance audit. I was nowhere near a computer. Grant knew that. He knew my schedule because I shared my calendar with the family in case of emergencies. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a ledger at work. The emotion drained away, leaving only the cold, hard facts. They had studied me. They had watched how I wrote, when I worked, and how I spoke. They had used my competence as a weapon against me. I looked at the house again. The front door opened. Grant stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan. He held a mug of steaming coffee. He looked out at the lake, surveying his kingdom. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who had solved a problem. He didn't see me in the car. The windows were tinted, and I was parked in the shadow of the pines. I watched him take a sip of coffee. He thought he had won. He thought he had moved the money from a dormant account to an active asset. He thought I would be angry. Sure, he probably expected me to yell. He probably had a speech prepared about investing in family and long-term returns. He didn't understand what he had done. He hadn't just stolen money. He had impersonated a depositor. He had committed wire fraud. He had forged electronic signatures. He thought he was dealing with his daughter. He forgot he was dealing with a forensic auditor. I put the car in reverse. I didn't want breakfast. I didn't want to hear their justifications. I backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. I needed to get to a printer. I needed to get to a secure Wi-Fi network. The withdrawal wasn't a mistake. It was a blueprint. And if they wanted to play with blueprints, I was going to show them what happens when you build a house on a foundation of fraud. I turned the car onto the main road and drove away from the picture-perfect rental, leaving them to their stolen turkey and their rented joy. I had work to do. I drove 4 hours west, leaving the upscale silence of Pennsylvania for the gray industrial grit of Canton Heights, Ohio. My apartment here was a corporate rental, the kind of place filled with furniture that smelled like cleaning chemicals and indifference. It was perfect. It was a fortress of solitude where I could perform the amputation. I sat at the small laminate desk, opened my laptop, and began the systematic execution of my family's lifestyle. I did not call them. I did not send a warning text. I simply logged into the main portal of my financial life and started cutting cords. First, the credit cards. I pulled up the American Express Platinum account. There were 3 authorized user cards attached to my primary line: Grant Green, Marla Green, Dylan Green. I looked at the recent activity: a steak dinner in Philadelphia, a spa visit, a charge for vintage sneakers that cost more than my first car. I clicked Remove Authorized User. Are you sure? The screen asked. I clicked Yes. Card terminated. I did it for Grant. Card terminated. I did it for Marla. Card terminated. Then I moved to the recurring payments. My bank statement was a map of their dependency. There was the family cell phone plan with Verizon. 5 lines, unlimited data, international roaming that only Dylan used. I called the provider. I would like to separate my line. I said to the operator, the other lines are the responsibility of the other adults. The operator warned me about cancellation fees. Put it on the final bill. I said, I canceled the auto pay for the insurance on Grant's SUV. I canceled the family subscription to the premium streaming services they used to watch movies in their living room while I worked late. I canceled the Easy Pass transponder tag that was currently sitting on the dashboard of Marla's car. It took me 3 hours. By the time I was finished, I had removed myself from every shared digital tether. I had changed every password. I had enabled two-factor authentication on everything, ensuring the codes came only to my phone, which was now locked with a new 6-digit PIN. I was not angry. I was efficient. It felt like cleaning out an infected wound. You do not negotiate with the infection. You scrub it out until you see clean tissue. I closed my laptop and waited. I knew how long it would take. We live in a world of instant feedback. The moment the credit card terminal declined, the signal would go up. It happened faster than I expected. At 8 o'clock that night, a heavy pounding shook my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the sound of entitlement hitting wood. It was the sound of people who believe that boundaries are just suggestions for other, lesser people. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. They pushed past me before I could even step back. It was a physical invasion. Grant came first, filling the small hallway with his presence and the smell of expensive leather. Marla followed, her heels clicking aggressively on the cheap linoleum. Dylan trailed behind them, looking sullen and terrified, like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for his parents to fix it. They did not look at the apartment. They did not notice that I was living in a beige box with a view of a parking lot. They only saw me as a malfunctioning appliance. Marla slammed a stack of papers onto my kitchen island. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the bare walls. I looked at the papers. They were receipts, declined receipts. I was at lunch. Marla shouted, "I was with the committee for the winter gala." I put my card down to cover the table, and the waiter came back. He came back to the table. "Chloe?" In front of everyone, he said the card was invalid. She paused to inhale, her chest heaving. "Do you know how humiliating that was?" she hissed. "I had to use my debit card. I had to transfer funds from the house account right there at the table." I leaned against the counter. I crossed my arms. "The house account is empty." "Marla," I said calmly. Grant stepped forward. He used his height to loom over me. It was a move that used to work when I was 12. It did not work now. "Do not play games with us." "Chloe," he said. His voice was low, the deep baritone he used to close deals. "You cut the lines." Dylan tried to fill up the tank on the way here and the pump rejected him. We had to pay cash. "Oh no," I said, my voice flat. "You had to pay for your own gas." That must have been traumatic. Dylan spoke up from the corner. He was wearing sunglasses inside. "At night. It is not about the gas." "Chloe." My Adobe Creative Cloud subscription bounced. I lost access to the edit files for the launch video. I have sponsors waiting for the final cut. If I cannot export, I am in breach of contract. I looked at my brother. He was worried about an Adobe subscription. He was not worried that his sister had just wiped out her medical savings. He was not worried that his hands were trembling in his pockets. "You are in breach of reality." "Dylan," I said. Grant slammed his hand down on the counter. The cheap laminate rattled. "Enough!" he roared. The room went quiet. Grant stared at me, his face flushing a dark, dangerous red. "This family runs because of you," he said. He pointed a finger at my face. "We built a system. We have an ecosystem. You do not get to just reach in and turn the engine off because you are having a tantrum." I looked at his finger. Then I looked at his eyes. "It is not an ecosystem, Grant," I said. "It is a parasite-host relationship, and the host is dying. So the host is cutting off the blood supply." Marla laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Dying? Oh, please. You are fine. You drove 4 hours today. You are standing right here. You are just being selfish. You are punishing us because we use the money for something visible, something that actually builds value for the green name, instead of letting it sit in a bank account for some hypothetical surgery you might need in 5 years. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It wasn't happiness. It was the realization that they truly did not know. They had rewritten the narrative so completely that they believed their own fiction. It wasn't hypothetical. "Marla," I said, "and it wasn't 5 years. It was next month." Dylan looked up. "Next month?" I ignored him. I looked at Grant. "I have one question," I said. Grant glared at me. "Fix this. Chloe, reactivate the cards." "I have one question," I repeated, my voice hard as diamonds. "Do you know what you spent?" They went silent. "I am not asking if you know the dollar amount," I continued. "I know you know the number. It was $41,200.50. I saw the invoice. I am asking if you know what you spent." Grant looked away. He adjusted his cufflink. "It was an investment," he muttered. "It was a spinal fusion." I said, "It was 4 titanium screws. It was 2 rods. It was 3 days in the ICU. It was 6 weeks of physical therapy." I looked at Dylan. "It was the difference between walking and being in a wheelchair by the time you are 40. I said. Dylan flinched. He looked at Marla. "Mom? What is she talking about?" Marla stepped in front of him, blocking his view of me. "She is being dramatic. Dylan, don't listen to her. She is trying to guilt you." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You want to talk about costs? Let us talk about costs. We have raised you. We have supported you. We gave you the connections to get your consulting contracts. You owe us. This money? It is a tax. Chloe, it is the price of admission to this family." I stared at her. The entitlement was so pure it was almost breathtaking. It was a dark comedy of manners where the punchline was my bankruptcy. "You stole my identity. Marla," I said, "you forged my signature. You impersonated me to a federal bank. That is not a tax. That is a felony." Grant's face changed. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He realized I wasn't just complaining. He realized I was using legal terminology. "We did what was necessary to protect the family assets." He said, "You were unstable. You were hoarding resources while your brother had a liquidity crisis. We acted as your proxies." "Proxies," I repeated. "Is that what you're calling it?" Marla reached into her purse. She pulled out an envelope. She did not hand it to me. She set it on the table next to the declined receipts. "We are not going to argue with you." "Chloe," she said. Her voice had dropped to a whisper, which was always more dangerous than her scream. "You are clearly having an episode. You are irrational. You are cutting off your family, your support system. That is not the behavior of a sane person." She tapped the envelope. "We are willing to overlook this tantrum," she said. "But you need to fix it. You need to call the bank. You need to retract your claim of fraud. You need to tell them it was a misunderstanding, and you need to restore the credit lines. And if I don't?" I asked. Marla smiled. It was the smile of a shark in shallow water. "Then we will take steps to protect the family," she said. "We cannot let you destroy yourself. If you cannot manage your affairs, we will have to manage them for you." I looked at the envelope. I didn't need to open it to know what was coming. It was the threat, the legal leash. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 9:15. I walked to the door. I unlocked it and pulled it wide open. The hallway outside was empty and cold. "Get out," I said. Grant laughed. "You are not listening." "Chloe, we are not leaving until you fix this. I am listening perfectly." I said, "I heard every word. You want me to restore the money you stole so you don't face consequences. You want me to continue funding a life you cannot afford, and you are threatening me with legal action if I don't comply." I pointed to the open door. "You have 24 hours to return the funds to the Harborstone account." I said, "Every cent." "We don't have it," Dylan shouted. "It is spent. The vendors are paid." "Then sell something." I said, "Sell the SUV. Sell the watch. Sell the camera gear." "I don't care." Marla stepped toward me. "You are making a mistake. You are going to start a war you cannot win. We are your parents. We know everything about you. We know where the skeletons are buried." I looked her in the eye. I felt a calm settle over me that was absolute. "I don't have any skeletons." "Marla," I said, "I just have receipts. I checked my watch. Your 24 hours start now." Grant looked at me. He saw something in my face he hadn't seen before. He saw the end of the line. He sneered, a look of pure disgust, and walked out the door. Marla grabbed her purse and followed him, whispering something vicious under her breath. Dylan stood there for a second. He looked at me, then at his hand. His thumb was twitching against his thigh. "Chloe," he said, "get out. Dylan." I said. He walked out. I slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain into place. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was pounding. But my hands were perfectly steady. They thought they had given me an ultimatum. They thought they had scared me. But all they had done was confirm the timeline. They had 24 hours to fix it. And when they didn't, because I knew they couldn't, I would be ready. I walked back to the desk. I didn't go to sleep. I opened a new browser tab and typed in the name of the toughest contract attorney I had ever met. The silence in the apartment was beautiful. It was the sound of the engine turning off. The deadline I gave them was 24 hours. They didn't need that long. They didn't even need the night. I found the envelope at 3 p.m. on Friday. I had just come back from a walk around the perimeter of the apartment complex. A habit I had developed to burn off the adrenaline that was currently replacing my blood. I walked up the concrete stairs to the second floor. My keys already woven through my fingers like brass knuckles. There was no mat in front of my door, just the stained industrial carpet of the hallway, and lying right in the center of the threshold, square and heavy, was a manila envelope. It had no stamp. It had no return address. It had not traveled through the postal system. It had been placed there by a human hand. My name was typed on a white label in bold. Sans serif fond. Chloe Elizabeth Green. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The hallway smelled of someone cooking onions and old cigarette smoke. The silence was heavy. I looked up at the ceiling, checking for cameras. But this was a cheap complex. There were no eyes here. I picked it up. It was thick. A ream of paper thick. It felt like a brick. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked it again. I engaged the deadbolt. I slid the chain. I wedged a chair under the handle. It was a futile gesture. Paperwork does not care about locks. But my body needed the ritual. I sat at the laminate desk and used a kitchen knife to slit the top of the envelope. I pulled the stack of papers out. The first page was on blue-backed legal paper. The header was stamped with the seal of the Clover County Superior Court. Petition for appointment of conservator of the person and estate. Proposed ward. Chloe Elizabeth Green. Petitioners. Grant Green and Marla Green. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to solidify. I read the words again, but they didn't change. Conservator. Ward. They weren't suing me for the money. They weren't trying to evict me. They were trying to erase me. I turned the page. My hands were cold. The kind of cold that starts in the marrow. I forced myself to read. I forced my brain to switch from daughter mode to auditor mode. This was just data. This was just a claim. But it was a horror story written in Times New Roman. The petition laid out a narrative that was so meticulously constructed, it was almost beautiful in its malice. It described a woman I did not recognize, yet who wore my face and used my bank accounts. The proposed ward has exhibited a rapid and alarming decline in mental stability over the preceding 6 months. Paragraph 4 read, "She has become increasingly paranoid, isolating herself in temporary housing in distant cities, refusing familial contact, and exhibiting erratic financial behavior." Erratic financial behavior. I turned to Exhibit A. It was a spreadsheet. It listed every account I had closed the night before, the credit cards, the streaming services, the Easy Pass. On the night of November 28th, the document stated, "The proposed ward engaged in a manic purge of established financial obligations, effectively stranding her family and cutting off essential utilities without warning or provocation. This act was not rational financial planning, but a symptom of a dissociative break." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. Hot and sour. They had taken my boundaries and relabeled them as symptoms. My self-protection was their proof of insanity. I kept reading, It got worse. There were witness statements. Affidavit of Sarah Miller, neighbor. I didn't know a Sarah Miller. I scanned the address. It was the woman who lived 2 doors down from my parents in Briar Ridge. A woman I had spoken to maybe 3 times in 10 years. Statement. Chloe always seemed off. She would sit in her car for hours before going inside. Last Thanksgiving, I heard screaming coming from the house. She looked wild when she left. I fear for her safety. I hadn't screamed. I had whispered, but Sarah Miller had signed a sworn statement saying I looked wild. Affidavit of Dr. Eris Thorne, licensed clinical counselor. I froze. I had never seen a counselor named Eris Thorne. I had never been in his office. I had never sat on his couch. Statement. Based on a review of the family's testimony and digital correspondence provided by the parents, the subject displays classic markers of paranoid personality disorder with potential schizoaffective features. Immediate intervention is recommended to prevent self-harm or financial ruin. They had paid someone. They had found a doctor who was willing to diagnose a ghost for a fee. This wasn't just a lie. It was malpractice. It was a crime. I turned the page. Exhibit D. Evidence of emotional cruelty and instability. It was a screenshot of the text I had sent to Dylan, the one where I told him to pay his own bills. Context provided by petitioner. The proposed ward sent this message to her younger brother, knowing he suffers from severe anxiety, in a deliberate attempt to inflict psychological distress. I put the paper down. I felt sick. The room was spinning slightly. This was gaslighting on a judicial scale. They were taking reality, breaking its legs, and resetting them at a crooked angle so that everything I did to survive looked like I was trying to destroy myself. And then I found the trap. Clipped to the back of the petition was a separate document. It was thinner, on standard white paper. It had cheerful neon sticky flags pointing to the signature lines. Voluntary care agreement and asset management plan. There was a post-it note attached to the front in Marla's handwriting. Chloe, we don't want to do this the hard way. Sign this. And we drop the court filing. We just want you to be safe. Love, Mom. I read the agreement. It was an unconditional surrender. If I signed it, I agreed to let Grant manage the Harborstone Trust for my benefit. I agreed to attend therapy with Dr. Thorne. I agreed to restore the credit cards. In exchange, they would not file the conservatorship petition with the court. It was an off-ramp. It was a way out of the humiliation of a public hearing. All I had to do was agree that I was crazy and let them take the money. If I signed it, I would be admitting that everything in the petition was true. I would be handing them a confession. And once they had that, they could file for a permanent conservatorship whenever they wanted, and I would have already provided the evidence against myself. I looked at the filing date on the petition. It was dated 3 days ago, Tuesday, the day of the bank transfer. They hadn't filed this because I cut the credit cards last night. They had prepared this before Thanksgiving. They had this ready in the chamber. The dinner wasn't a negotiation. It was a setup. They knew I would react. They knew I would ask about the money. They were banking on me getting angry. They needed me to make a scene so they could say, "See? She is unstable." If I hadn't cut the cards, they would have found another reason to drop this envelope. I looked at the very last page of the legal stack. Request for ex parte. Emergency temporary orders. My stomach dropped. I knew what ex parte meant. It meant, for one party. It meant they were asking a judge to sign this order immediately, without a hearing, without me present, because the emergency was so great that there wasn't time to listen to my side. If a judge signed this, my bank accounts would be frozen by tomorrow morning. My right to hire a lawyer would be subject to Grant's approval. My medical records would be open to them. They could lock me out of my own life before the sun came up. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking now, a violent tremor that matched Dylan's. But mine was born of pure adrenaline. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call the police. The police would look at the paperwork, see civil dispute, and walk away. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't used in 4 years. Nina Caraway. I had met her when I was consulting for a logistics firm that was being sued by a union buster. Nina was the defense attorney. She was 5 feet tall, wore suits that cost more than my car, and I had watched her dismantle a 60-year-old CEO on the stand until he was stuttering and asking for water. She didn't practice family law. She practiced corporate warfare. And that was exactly what this was. I hit dial. It rang once, twice, Caraway. A voice snapped. It was sharp, impatient, like I had interrupted a bomb defusal. Nina, it is Chloe Green. I was the auditor on the McKinnon case. There was a pause, a silence that stretched for 3 seconds. The auditor who found the shell companies in the Cayman ledger? Nina asked. Her voice softened. Just a fraction. Yes, I need you. I am expensive. Chloe, and I don't do parking tickets. This isn't a parking ticket, I said. My father just served me with a petition for an emergency conservatorship. He is trying to seize control of my assets and my personhood. He has a psychiatrist on payroll who I have never met, and he has filed for an ex parte order. I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. I heard the click of a pen. Where are you? Nina asked. Ohio. But the filing is in Clover County. Pennsylvania. Send me the docket number. Scan the petition. Do it now. I have a settlement agreement, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. They sent a voluntary agreement. They said if I sign it, they will make it go away. Do not sign anything. Nina's voice cut through the line like a whip. It was so loud, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Her tone changed. It went from impatient to lethal. Chloe, listen to me. This is not a negotiation. They are not trying to win an argument. They are trying to remove you from the board. If you sign that paper, you are legally declaring yourself incompetent. You will never sign a check, rent an apartment, or make a medical decision again without their permission. I looked at the neon sticky flag. Sign here. They said I was paranoid. I whispered, paranoid is just a word for people who know they are being hunted. Nina said, send me the documents. I need to see the judge's name. I need to see the timestamps. Can you stop it? I asked. The ex parte? I am going to do more than stop it, Nina said. I am going to make them wish they had never learned how to spell the word conservatorship. She paused. Are you safe? Physically? I have a chair under the door handle. Good. Keep it there. Don't answer the door. Don't answer unknown numbers. If they show up, you call 911 and you say the words trespassing and harassment. Do not engage. Do not try to explain yourself. You are not a daughter right now. Chloe, you are a defendant. I swallowed. The reality of it hit me hard. I was a defendant in a case titled The Matter of Chloe Green. I will scan them now. I said, get to a scanner, Nina ordered. And Chloe? Yes, stop shaking. They want you shaking. It makes the handwriting look unstable. I looked at my hand. She was right. I will stop, I said. I hung up. I looked at the envelope again. It wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. They had fired a missile at my life, expecting me to crumble, expecting me to cry and beg and sign the treaty just to make the noise stop. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and drank a glass of cold water. I forced the tremor in my hand to still. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until my ribs ached. Then I walked over to the desk, picked up the petition, and fed the first page into the scanner. The machine whirred. The light swept across the page, digitizing the lies, turning their trap into my ammunition. I wasn't going to sign. I was going to war. Nina Caraway gave me my marching orders at 6 a.m. on Saturday. Her voice over the phone was not the voice of a comforting friend. It was the voice of a general inspecting the trenches. She told me to build a wall, not a metaphorical wall, but a literal, physical fortification of facts. She said that in a conservatorship hearing, the person with the most paper wins. If they claimed I was erratic, I needed to be boringly, aggressively documented. If they claimed I was financially reckless, I needed to show every latte, every gas fill-up, every parking meter receipt for the last 5 years. So I stopped sleeping. My apartment in Canton Heights became 2 different worlds separated by the setting sun. From 8 a.m. until 6 p.m, I was Chloe Green, senior consultant for Meridian Bridge. I sat on Zoom calls in a blazer, discussing supply chain bottlenecks and logistics integration with clients who had no idea that the woman advising them on million-dollar freight contracts was currently being hunted by her own parents. I smiled. I nodded. I projected stability. But the second the laptop camera turned off, the war room opened. I bought a printer. I bought a 3-hole punch. I bought binders in 4 different colors. Red for the Harborstone Trust, blue for medical records, black for the event expenses, the Silverlark money trail, green for the new horror, the conservatorship petition. I started printing. The sound of the laser jet became the soundtrack of my life. Whir, click, slide. I printed my travel logs showing I was in Ohio when the bank transfer happened. I printed the email headers Elliot Kane had sent me, highlighting the fake domain name in neon yellow. I printed the hospital notices. I was building a monument to my own sanity, but Grant and Marla were not waiting for the court date. They were impatient. They realized that the insufficient funds notification was just the beginning, and they needed to escalate before I could mount a defense. On Tuesday, 4 days after the envelope appeared, the second blow landed. It came as a certified letter from my employer's Human Resources Department. I signed for it with a shaking hand, the postman looking at me with mild annoyance because I took too long to find a pen. I opened it in the kitchen. Notice of benefits. Termination pending investigation. The room went quiet. I read the first paragraph. My health insurance, the PPO plan I had fought to keep, the plan that covered my neurology appointments and the tests for the condition I didn't even have, was suspended. The reason was listed in bold: fraudulent claims activity. I stared at the number. The total amount of flagged claims was $39,800. It was almost the exact amount they had stolen from the trust. They weren't just thieves. They were artists of symmetry. I turned to the itemized list of claims. My knees gave out, and I sat hard on the linoleum floor. The claims were not for spinal surgery. They were not for neurology. November 26th. Inpatient psychiatric observation. 3 days. Provider, Crestview Wellness Center. Out of network. November 29th. Crisis stabilization and detox. Provider, Serenity Path. Out of network. December 1st. Emergency behavioral monitoring. I had never been to Crestview. I had never been to Serenity Path. I understood the game immediately. It was sickeningly brilliant. They had used my insurance portal login, which I must have saved on a family computer years ago, or perhaps Marla guessed the password because she knew the name of my first pet, to file for reimbursement. They had submitted fake invoices from out-of-network providers. When you file an out-of-network claim, the insurance company sends the check to the policyholder, not the doctor. They had filed the claims. They had set the mailing address to Briar Ridge. They were trying to get the insurance company to cut them a check for $40,000 to replace the money I was forcing them to pay back. But it was worse than the fraud. It was the paper trail. If these claims stood, my permanent medical record would say I was in a psychiatric detox facility the week after Thanksgiving. When we went to court for the conservatorship, Grant wouldn't even need to lie. He would just subpoena my insurance records. "Look, Your Honor," he would say, "she was in detox. Here is the proof." I scrambled up from the floor and grabbed my phone. I dialed the insurance customer service line. I spent 45 minutes in a hold queue, listening to smooth jazz that sounded like a funeral dirge. Finally, a representative named Jason answered. "I need to report identity theft," I said. My voice was tight, high-pitched. "Those claims are fake. I was at work. I can prove it. I have timesheets. I have Zoom logs. Ma'am." The account was accessed via a verified login. Jason said. His voice was bored. He heard stories like this all the time. Two-factor authentication was bypassed using a recovery email. "What recovery email?" I asked. "The one on file," he said. "Marla, Green, home@gmail.com. I closed my eyes. "Of course. Jason," I said, forcing myself to slow down. "I need you to tell me the IP address of the device that submitted those claims. I cannot give out technical data." He said, "I am the policyholder." I snapped. And I am telling you that a crime has been committed across state lines. If you do not give me that IP address, I will add your company to the list of defendants in the lawsuit I am filing tomorrow." There was a silence, then the sound of typing. "I can give you the origin location," Jason said, his voice wary. "Tell me." "The submissions originated from a residential ISP in Briar Ridge, Pennsylvania." I wrote it down. Briar Ridge. It was the smoking gun. They were sitting in that A-frame house, looking out at the frozen lake, logging into my life, and typing detox into a claim form. They were dismantling my reputation to pay for a party. I hung up. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard rage that solidified in my chest like concrete. I added the insurance letter to the blue binder. I added the notes from the call to the black binder. I texted Nina. "They are filing fake insurance claims to get the cash. They are building a psychiatric history for me. I have the IP location." Nina texted back instantly. "Do not engage. Let them dig. We need the hole to be deep." I thought that was the end of the day's horror. I was wrong. At 10:30 that night, I was sitting on the floor surrounded by my binders, organizing the invoices from Silverlark Productions. I had found a discrepancy in the catering bill. Charge for 200 guests when the fire marshal permit was only for 50, then the room washed with blue light. It swept across the ceiling, rhythmic and bright. I stood up and walked to the window. I peered through the blinds. There were 2 police cruisers parked in the lot directly below my apartment. Their lights were silent, but they were flashing. I saw 2 officers get out. They were adjusting their belts. They looked up at my window. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the door. The chair was still wedged under the handle. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on. I heard their heavy boots on the stairs. Thud, thud, thud. They stopped at my door. A heavy fist hit the wood. Bang, bang, bang. "Police! Open up!" I took a breath. I walked to the door. I didn't open it. "Who is it?" I asked. "Officer Miller." "Canton Heights. PD. We have a welfare check request. Open the door." "Ms. Green?" "I'm fine," I said through the wood. "I'm safe. You can leave." "Ma'am, we have a report of a disturbance," the officer said. His voice was all business. "We have a report that you've been breaking glass and making threats, saying you were going to tear the place apart. We need to visually verify you're okay. If you do not open the door, we will have to come in. Breaking glass." I looked around my apartment. It was silent. It was neat. The only thing on the floor was paper. They had called it in. Marla, or Grant. They'd called the police in Ohio and fed them a story they could file. They wanted a report. They wanted an incident number. Subject was agitated. Police were called. Another brick in the wall of my instability, I moved the chair away from the door. I slid the chain free. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. I was wearing my reading glasses and a silk robe over my pajamas. I held a red binder in my hand. I stood tall. I did not look like a woman breaking glass. I looked like an annoyed accountant. Officer Miller blinked. He was young, broad-shouldered, ready for a fight. He looked past me into the apartment, expecting chaos. He saw the color-coded binders. He saw the printer. He saw the quiet, sterile order of my life. "Ms. Green?" he asked. "I am Chloe Green." I said. My voice was steady. "May I ask who called you?" "Family member," he said, lowering his hand from his holster. "Said you were hysterical. Said you were throwing things." I stepped back and swept my arm toward the room. "Does it look like I'm throwing things?" "Officer?" He walked in, his partner following. The partner was a woman, older, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't look at the room. She looked at me. The male officer did a quick sweep. "Kitchen. Bathroom. Bedroom. Nothing," he said to his partner. "No glass, no weapons. Place is clean." He turned back to me. He looked confused, maybe a bit embarrassed. "We got a call. Ma'am, we have to take it seriously. Your mother sounded very distressed. My mother lives in Pennsylvania." I said, "She has not seen me in 4 days. This is a harassment tactic. I am currently in a legal dispute with my family regarding financial fraud. They are trying to generate a police record to support a conservatorship petition. I used the big words. I used the legal words. I needed them to know I wasn't a victim. I was a combatant. The male officer shifted his weight. Right. Well, if you are okay, we will clear the call. He started to head for the door, but the female officer, her name tag read DET, Hollis, didn't move. She was looking at the table. She was looking at the stack of insurance claim printouts. She looked at the label on the envelope. Clover County Superior Court. She looked at me. Her eyes were dark and intelligent. You are the one with the trust fund? She asked. It wasn't a trust fund, I said. It was medical savings. Hollis nodded. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a card. I was in Vice before I transferred to this precinct, she said. I worked elder abuse and fraud. I have seen this before. Seen what? I asked. Families, she said. She said the word like it was a curse. We call it weaponized concern. They call in a suicide risk. We show up. We break the door down. You scream because you are terrified. We handcuff you for your own safety. They get the body cam footage and use it to prove you are dangerous. I felt a chill run down my spine. That was the plan. If I had screamed, if I had fought, if I had been anything other than ice cold, they would have won. You handled it well, Hollis said. She handed me the card. But they won't stop with one call. If they are desperate enough to swat you, they are desperate enough to escalate. What do? I asked. Hollis looked at the binders. You keep doing that, she said, pointing to the paper wall. And next time they call, you tell dispatch you have a harassment file open. I will put a note in your jacket tonight. Verify caller ID. Civil dispute pending. Thank you, I whispered. She paused at the door. Don't let them make you crazy, she said softly. That is how they win. They don't need to prove you are crazy. They just need to make you act like it for 5 minutes. She closed the door. I locked it. I put the chair back. I sat down at the desk. My hands were trembling again. But this time, I let them. I let the fear wash over me for exactly 60 seconds. Then I shut it off. I picked up my phone. I took a picture of the police card. I took a picture of the time. I texted Nina. Police just left. Welfare check. Reported me for breaking glass. Officer confirmed it was a swatting attempt. I have a Detective Hollis who is flagging my file. I waited. The 3 dots appeared. Then Nina's text came through. IP address traced to their home. Police report confirming false emergency call. Insurance fraud verified. A second text followed. Good. We are done building the wall. Chloe. And then a third. Now we are not just defending. Now we are prosecuting. I looked at the binders. The red, the blue, the black. They weren't just a defense anymore. They were an indictment. I pulled a fresh binder from the pack. I didn't have a color for this one, so I used white. I took a Sharpie and wrote on the spine, the offense. I opened the laptop. I had work to do. The night was young, and I had a family to dismantle. The shift happened on Wednesday morning. It was a physical sensation, like a fever breaking. I woke up, looked at the stack of binders on my desk, and realized I was no longer afraid of the envelope outside my door. I was no longer the victim of a family tragedy. I was the lead prosecutor in a case of gross financial negligence. I stopped being a daughter. I became an exhibit list. Nina Caraway did not wait for the court to open. She filed an emergency objection electronically at 4 a.m. She requested an expedited review, effectively throwing a wrench into the gears of Grant's ex parte machine. She argued that granting temporary control without a hearing would cause irreparable harm to a solvent, employed, and cognitively sound adult. She attached my work schedule, my travel logs, and a sworn affidavit stating I was currently performing sensitive corporate audits. The judge granted the review. We had 48 hours before the hearing. I did not spend those 48 hours sleeping. My first call was to Elliot Kane. I needed more than a phone conversation. I needed his reputation on paper. I sent him a draft of an affidavit Nina had prepared. It was brutal in its clarity. Elliot returned it signed and notarized within 2 hours. I, Elliot Kane, Senior Private Client Advisor. Attests that the transfer of $41,200.50 was authorized via an email communication that has since been identified as fraudulent. The security protocols were bypassed using a domain spoofing technique. He detailed the exact authentication steps. He listed the failed voice verification. He listed the IP address of the incoming email. He listed the extra letter N in the email address. It was a shield, but I needed a sword. Nina brought in a digital forensics specialist named Marcus. He was a man who spoke in binary and looked at the world as a series of ones and zeros. I sent him the raw data from the fake email headers. He called me back on a secure video link. It is not just a spoof. Chloe, Marcus said. He pulled up a diagram on the screen. Whoever registered this domain, Chloe-Green-Consulting, did it through a hosting service that offers anonymity protection, but they paid for it with a credit card. Can you see the card? I asked. No, Marcus said, but I can see the billing zip code, 15003. I stared at the screen. 15003 was the zip code for Briar Ridge. It gets better, Marcus said. The domain was configured to auto-forward replies to a secondary address, Grant Green ventures@gmail.com. I wrote it down. My father had not just impersonated me. He had set up a digital funnel to ensure he caught any suspicion before it reached me. He was intercepting the bank's questions. Add it to the red binder. I said. Then I went hunting for the money. I knew the funds had gone to Silverlark Productions. I had the invoice. But when I looked closer at the wire transfer details Elliot had sent, I noticed something odd about the beneficiary. The money did not go directly to Silverlark's corporate account. It went to an intermediary, an LLC called High Desert Strategy. I searched the business registry for New Mexico. High Desert Strategy was formed 6 weeks ago. The registered agent was a generic legal service, but the managing member? Grant Green. My father had set up a shell company. I sat back in my chair, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He had not just paid the vendors directly. He had washed the money through his own entity first. Why? I pulled the Silverlark invoices again. I compared the totals. The wire transfer from my trust was for $41,200, but the actual invoices from Silverlark, when I added up the lighting, the venue, the influencers, only came to $32,000. There was a $9,000 gap. Grant had skimmed it. He had stolen from his daughter, funded his son's party, and taken a 20% management fee for himself. He had treated the theft of my medical savings as a billable project. This was not a desperate father trying to help his son. This was money laundering. I called Nina. He kept $9,000. I said, my voice was flat. I know. Nina said. She did not sound surprised. We subpoenaed the bank records for High Desert Strategy an hour ago. We will see the outflow by tomorrow. It probably went to his car lease or his mortgage. It changes everything. I said, yes, Nina said. It moves this from family court to criminal court. But we stick to the plan. We save the criminal charges for the leverage. First, we kill the conservatorship. I went back to the paperwork. I opened the green binder, the petition itself. I laid out the witness statements on my floor. There were 5 of them. Sarah Miller, the neighbor, Dr. Eris Thorne, the paid counselor, Jessica Vance, a supposed former coworker, Kevin Lewis, another coworker, Marla Green. I read them out loud. Sarah Miller. Chloe has exhibited erratic behavior and paranoid delusions regarding money. Jessica Vance. Chloe was difficult to work with and often spoke of paranoid delusions regarding money. Kevin Lewis. She was terminated from our project due to paranoid delusions regarding money. The phrase paranoid delusions regarding money appeared 3 times. Exact wording, exact punctuation. People do not speak in unison. Even when they are telling the truth, they use different words. If 3 people see a car crash, one says smash, one says accident, and one says collision. They had used a template. Grant had written a script, probably in Word, and emailed it to these people. I looked at the dates. All 5 affidavits were notarized on November 28th. I looked at the timestamps next to the notary seal. Sarah Miller, 2:15 in the afternoon, Dr. Thorne. 2:20 in the afternoon, Jessica Vance. 2:30 in the afternoon, Kevin Lewis. 2:35 in the afternoon. The notary was a man named Thomas Reed in Briar Ridge. I looked up the addresses of these witnesses. Sarah Miller lived in Briar Ridge. Dr. Thorne had an office in Philadelphia, an hour away. Jessica Vance lived in Chicago. Kevin Lewis lived in Columbus, Ohio. It was physically impossible for a notary in Briar Ridge to witness a signature from a man in Ohio and a woman in Chicago within a 20-minute window. They hadn't even flown the witnesses in. They had just stamped the papers. This was perjury. This was notary fraud. This was lazy. I picked up the phone. I needed to break one of them. I chose Kevin Lewis. I found his number in an old project directory. He was a junior analyst I had worked with once. Briefly, he was young, ambitious, and not particularly bright. I called him Kevin. I said when he answered, "This is Chloe Green." There was a silence, a long, terrified silence. Then the sound of a call trying to end. "Do not hang up." "Kevin," I said, "I am recording this call. I am holding a sworn affidavit with your signature on it that was notarized in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. Chloe, I cannot talk to you." He stammered. "You were in Columbus on Tuesday." "Kevin, we have your office swipe card logs. You were at your desk. You were not in Pennsylvania." I heard his breathing hitch. "If you hang up," I said, "my lawyer adds your name to the fraud indictment. You will lose your license. You will lose your job. You will go to jail for perjury." He started crying. It was a pathetic, sniffing sound. They said it was a formality. Kevin whispered, "Your dad, he knows my boss. He said you were sick. He said you needed help, but you were fighting it. He said if I signed the paper, it would help get you into a clinic. He offered me $500 for my time. $500? My reputation, my sanity, my freedom. It was worth $500 to Kevin Lewis. Did you read it?" I asked. "No," he admitted. "They just sent the signature page. I need you to email me exactly what you just said. Kevin, right now, copy my attorney. If you do that, we leave you out of the lawsuit. If you don't, I will destroy you." I did not scream. I did not threaten violence. I just stated the facts of his future. The email arrived 4 minutes later. Subject: Statement regarding Green affidavit. To Nina Caraway, Chloe Green, body. I was paid $500 by Grant Green to sign a document I did not read. I was told it was to help Chloe receive medical care. I was not in Pennsylvania. I retract my statement. I forwarded it to Nina. Got him. I texted. Nina called me immediately. "We have them," she said. Her voice was cold steel. "We have the fake domain. We have the shell company. We have the stolen money trail. And now we have a witness admitting to bribery and perjury." She paused. "Here's the plan for court tomorrow. Chloe, listen carefully. I am listening. Grant and Marla are going to walk in there playing the concerned parents. They are going to cry. They are going to tell a story about a daughter who has lost her way. They are going to try to make it an emotional debate." I tightened my grip on the phone. "We do not argue with their story," Nina said. "We do not defend your mental health. We do not try to prove you are sane. Sanity is subjective. Then what do? We show the court that your story is the only one with timestamps." She said, "We ignore the emotions. We focus entirely on the mechanics of the fraud. We treat the courtroom like an audit. You are not a daughter defending her life. You are the relentless passage of time and math." I looked at my wall of binders, the red, the blue, the black, the green, and the white one, labeled "The Offense." "I understand." I said, "Get some sleep." "Chloe," Nina said, "you need to look sharp. Tomorrow, we take the machine apart." I hung up. I did not sleep. I spent the night organizing the exhibits. I tabbed every page. I highlighted every date. I cross-referenced the flight logs with the bank transfers. I synced the text messages with the fake invoices. I built a timeline that was so dense, so impenetrable, that no lie could survive inside it. At 6 in the morning, I showered, I put on my navy blue suit, the one I wore to tell CEOs they were bankrupt. I pulled my hair back into a tight chignon. I applied makeup that made me look awake, but not soft. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at me did not have a trembling hand. She did not have a broken heart. She was a machine made of evidence. I picked up the binders. They were heavy, weighing down my arms. But I liked the weight. It felt like justice. I walked out the door, stepping over the spot where the envelope had lain, and I didn't look back. We were doing this the hard way, and I was bringing the hammer. I arranged to meet Dylan at a coffee shop in a town called Seven Hills, exactly halfway between my fortress in Canton Heights and the war zone in Briar Ridge. It was a neutral ground, a place of beige walls and generic indie folk music where nobody knew the name Green. I chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows, away from the eyes of passers-by. I stipulated the terms clearly in a text message. Come alone, no cameras, no recording devices. If I see a phone raised, I leave. He arrived 12 minutes late. It was a power move, or perhaps just his natural state of disarray. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that probably cost $600, pulled up over a baseball cap, and sunglasses that hid his eyes even in the dim lighting of the cafe. He looked like a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi, which was exactly the fantasy he lived in. He slid into the booth opposite me. He did not say hello. He placed his phone on the table, face down, but I saw his hand hovering near it. A nervous tick. Take off the glasses. Dylan, I said. He hesitated, then sighed. A long, dramatic exhalation of air. He removed the sunglasses and hooked them onto his collar. His eyes were rimmed with red. He looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from maintaining a lie for too long. This is crazy. Chloe, he started. His voice was low. Urgent. Mom is losing her mind. Dad is pacing the floor like a caged animal. You have to stop this. You are tearing the family apart over a clerical error. I stared at him. A clerical error. That was the new phrase. I ordered you a black coffee, I said, sliding the mug toward him. Drink it. You look like you are about to pass out. I don't want coffee, he snapped. I want you to sign the agreement. I want you to unlock the accounts. Do you know I had to cancel a collaboration with a beverage brand yesterday because I couldn't pay the legal retainer for the contract review? You are ruining my career. I reached into my bag. I did not pull out the binders. The binders were for the court, for Dylan. I had something smaller, something more intimate. I pulled out a single manila folder. It contained the medical summary. Dr. Owen Vale had written 11 months ago. The summary I had hidden from him to protect his ego. I slid it across the table. Read this, I said. He looked at the folder like it was a bomb. What is it? More legal threats? Just read it. Dylan, he opened the folder. I watched his eyes scan the page. I watched him read the header. Northline Medical Center, Department of Neurology. I watched him read the patient name. Dylan James Green. I saw the moment the words started to register. Diagnosis. Cervical myelopathy with high-grade stenosis. Prognosis without intervention. Progressive loss of fine motor skills. Gait disturbance. Potential paralysis. Recommended treatment. Anterior cervical discectomy and fusion. Surgical window. 6 to 8 months. He stopped reading. He looked up at me. His face had gone very pale. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a confusion that was heartbreakingly young. What is this? He whispered. That is why your hands shake. I said. My voice was quiet. It is not stress. It is not too much caffeine. It is your spine compressing your spinal cord. He looked back at the paper. But Dad said it was just nerves. He said I just needed to toughen up. Dad is not a doctor. I said, Owen is. We ran these tests in January. Do you remember? The vitamin drip? He nodded slowly. I didn't tell you the full extent because I knew you would panic. I said, and I knew the family would weaponize it. So I created the trust. The money in Harborstone wasn't for me. Dylan, it was for you. It was for the surgery. I was saving it so that when you were ready, we could pay cash and get it done without Grant making you feel like a failure for needing help." He sat there, frozen. The noise of the coffee shop faded away. It was just the two of us, a brother and a sister sitting over the wreckage of a good intention. $40,000. I continued, "That was the price of your spine. That was the price of your ability to walk in 5 years." He looked down at his hands. He held them out in front of him. They were trembling. He couldn't stop them. You were saving it for me?" he asked. "Yes. And He trailed off. "You spent it on a party." I finished for him. "You spent your surgery money on a champagne wall and a videographer." He flinched. He physically recoiled from the words. "I didn't know." He said, his voice rose, cracking. "I didn't know it was for this. Dad just said there was money available. He said you were hoarding it. He said it was family resources that were sitting idle." I pulled out my phone. I opened the screenshot I had saved. The one from the group chat. "Funds cleared. We are doing this big." I showed it to him. "You knew it came from my account." I said, "You knew I wasn't answering my phone. You knew Mom had to pretend I was unreachable to get it." Dylan looked at the screen, then at me. His defense was crumbling, but he was trying to hold on to the scraps of it. I thought you were just being difficult. You're always so tight with money. I thought you would be mad, but that you would get over it. I didn't know it was medical money." I leaned forward. This was the moment, the pivot point. "Dylan, look at me." He met my eyes. "Did you suspect?" I asked. "Deep down, did you suspect that the money wasn't ours to take?" He opened his mouth to lie. I could see the reflex kicking in. The years of training Grant had drilled into him. Deny, deflect, defend. But looking at the medical report, looking at the reality of his own failing body, something broke in him. He slumped in the booth. He looked small. "Yes," he whispered. "Why didn't you ask me?" I asked. "Why didn't you call me before you authorized the transfer?" He closed his eyes. "Because I knew you would say no," he said. "And if I asked, and you said no, then I couldn't have the launch. And if I didn't have the launch," he shrugged, a gesture of helpless vanity. "I didn't ask because not asking let me keep the party," he said. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It was gross, and it was selfish, but it was the truth. He had traded his integrity for plausible deniability. I sat back. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I loved him, despite his weakness, despite his narcissism. He was my brother, but love does not mean paying for someone else's crimes. "I have a message from Nina Carraway, my attorney." I said. Dylan stiffened. The name of the lawyer brought the fear back. "We are going to court tomorrow." I said, "We have proof of the forgery. We have proof of the shell company Dad used to launder the money. We have a witness who admitted to perjury." Dylan's eyes widened. "Who? Kevin Lewis?" I said, "Dad paid him $500 to sign a false affidavit. We have it in writing." Dylan put his head in his hands. "Oh my God. Here is the choice. Dylan," I said, "and you need to listen because this is the only lifeline you are going to get." He looked up. "You can go into that courtroom tomorrow and stick to the script Dad gave you." I said, "You can lie. You can say I'm crazy. You can say the money was a gift. And if I do, then you become a co-defendant." I said, "When we file the criminal fraud charges, and we will, your name will be next to Grant's and Marla's. You spent the money. You signed the contracts. You benefited from the theft. You will be liable for the repayment. You will have a felony record. And your sponsors? They will drop you before the ink dries on the indictment." He started to shake his head, panic rising in his chest. "Or," I said, cutting him off, "you can tell the truth." "The truth? You take the stand," I said, "and you say exactly what you just told me. You say you didn't know the money was medical. You say Grant told you it was family funds. You say you were pressured to go along with the transfer. You admit that you spent it, but you testify that the scheme to access the account came from Grant and Marla. If you do that," I said, "Nina will grant you immunity from the civil suit. We will leave you out of the fraud claim. You will still have to deal with the moral fallout. But you won't go to jail, and you won't be bankrupt. Dylan stared at the coffee mug. The steam had stopped rising. Dad will kill me, he whispered. Dad is going to lose. Dylan, I said, the evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether he takes you down with him. Dylan picked up the medical folder. He traced the line that said, paralysis. He coached me. He said softly, What? Dad, he coached me. Last night, in the living room, I felt a cold spike in my stomach. Tell me. He sat me down. Dylan said, his voice flat. He wrote out a script on index cards. He told me that when the judge asks about the money, I have to say that you promised it to me months ago, that you said, I want to invest in your future. He told me to use those exact words. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. He told me to cry. Chloe, he said, if you can squeeze out a tear when you talk about your sister's mental decline, it will seal the deal. He rehearsed it with me. He made me do it 3 times until I sounded sincere. I felt the nausea rise, but I pushed it down. Of course he did. Grant Green directed his life like a movie, and a courtroom was just another set. And the medical stuff, I asked? The detox? He told me to say I visited you there, Dylan said. He told me to say I saw you in the facility. I stared at him. And were you going to do it? Were you going to lie about visiting me in a psych ward I was never in? Dylan wavered. He looked at the door of the coffee shop, thinking about running. Then he looked at the medical report again. He looked at the reality of his spine. I don't know, he admitted. I was scared. He said if we lose the house. He said we lose everything. You have already lost the house. Dylan, I said, the mortgage fraud investigation that is coming will take care of that. The only thing you have left to save is your own name. I reached out and put my hand on his. His skin was clammy. Keep the folder. I said, take it with you. Look at it tonight. And when you walk into that courtroom tomorrow, remember that the people asking you to lie are the same people who let your surgical window close so they could have a party. I stood up. I didn't hug him. We were past hugs. I will see you in court, I said. I walked out of the coffee shop. I got into my rental car and drove back to the hotel where I was staying near the courthouse. I didn't go back to Canton Heights. The siege was over. The battle was here now. I sat in the hotel room, watching the lights of the city. I felt drained, empty. I had offered him the way out. But I didn't know if he would take it. Dylan had spent his whole life looking for the easiest path. The truth was a hard road. At 9 o'clock. My phone buzzed. It was a text message. The number was unknown. But I knew the voice immediately. Drop the case and we will fix your insurance. We will pay the premiums for a year. We can make the claims disappear. Don't make us release the photos from the facility. You know how bad that will look for your career. This is your last chance to be a good daughter. I stared at the screen. The photos from the facility. There were no photos because there was no facility, but they would manufacture them. They would find a picture of me sleeping or looking disheveled and caption it, detox unit. They were doubling down. They were threatening to torch my professional reputation if I didn't surrender. It was desperate. It was vicious. And it was exactly what I needed. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I took a screenshot. I forwarded it to Nina. Marla just sent this from a burner number. I typed. 3 seconds later, Nina's reply came through. Perfect. She wrote, that is intimidation of a witness and extortion. Add it to the white binder. We are going to read that out loud to the judge. I put the phone down. I thought about Dylan sitting in his room, looking at the diagram of his broken neck. I thought about Grant writing scripts on index cards. I thought about Marla typing threats on a burner phone. They were working so hard to keep the illusion alive. I turned off the light. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow, I was going to turn the lights on, and I was going to watch them burn. The courtroom in Clover County smelled of floor wax and old decisions. It was a small room, windowless and severe, designed to strip away the pretense of the outside world. But my parents had brought their pretense with them. Grant and Marla arrived 15 minutes early. They were dressed in costumes designed by a public relations firm. Grant wore a soft, oatmeal-colored sweater under a tweed jacket, the uniform of a kindly, beleaguered grandfather, not a corporate shark. Marla wore pale blue, a color that suggested fragility and grace. She held a handkerchief in her hand, twisting it periodically, though her eyes were perfectly dry. They sat on the left side of the aisle. I sat on the right. Between us lay a chasm of mahogany and silence. Their attorney, Miles Harrow, was a man I recognized by reputation. He specialized in high-conflict family law, usually representing the spouse with the money against the spouse with the truth. He leaned over to them, whispering, touching Marla's shoulder with a performance of deep sympathy. I looked at my attorney. Nina Carraway was not whispering. She was organizing her binders. She laid them out on the table with surgical precision. Red, blue, black, green, white. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked like a demolition expert checking the wiring on the charges. The bailiff called the court to order. Commissioner Vance entered. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and an expression that suggested she had heard every lie ever told in the state of Pennsylvania. Miles Harrow stood up to give his opening statement. His voice was liquid gold. It was soft, tragic, and utterly compelling. Your Honor, he began, clasping his hands behind his back. We are not here out of malice. We are here out of love. The petitioners, Grant and Marla Green, have watched their daughter, Chloe, spiral into a state of profound mental instability over the last 6 months. She has isolated herself. She has exhibited paranoid delusions about her family. She has recklessly burned through her financial safety nets in manic episodes. He turned to look at me. His eyes were sad. We are asking for a temporary conservatorship not to control her, but to protect her, he said, to stop her from destroying her own future while she gets the help she so clearly needs. He sat down. It was a beautiful speech. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed him. Commissioner Vance looked at Nina. Ms. Carraway? Nina stood up. She did not walk to the podium. She stood at our table, one hand resting on the stack of binders. We waive opening statement. Your Honor, Nina said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the haze of Miles's tragedy. We would like to call our first witness immediately, Dr. Owen Vale. Miles blinked. He had expected a speech. He had expected an emotional defense. He wasn't ready for a witness list. Objection, Miles said, half rising. We are here for a preliminary hearing on the temporary orders, and I am here to show why those orders are based on perjury and fraud. Nina shot back. The commissioner peered over her glasses. Call the witness. The doors opened. Doctor? Owen Vale walked in. He was wearing his hospital ID clipped to his suit pocket. He looked exactly what he was, a man who spent his days looking at the inside of human brains. He took the stand. He was sworn in. Dr. Vale, Nina said, skipping the pleasantries. Do you treat a member of the Green family? I do, Owen said. Is it Chloe Green? No, it is Dylan Green. A ripple went through the room. Grant shifted in his seat. Marla stopped twisting her handkerchief. Nina walked to the projector screen set up in the center of the room. Can you describe Dylan Green's medical condition? Objection, Miles shouted. Privacy. HIPAA violation. Nina held up a piece of paper. I have a signed HIPAA waiver from the patient authorizing Dr. Vale to testify regarding his diagnosis and the financial arrangements made for his care. The commissioner nodded. Overruled. Answer the question. Owen looked at Grant, then at the judge. Dylan has severe cervical myelopathy. Owen said, his spinal cord is being compressed. He has lost 30% of the grip strength in his right hand. He suffers from intention tremors. Without surgical intervention, specifically an anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, he faces a high probability of permanent paralysis within 5 years. The room went deadly silent. Marla gasped, a real sound this time. She looked at Dylan, who was sitting in the back row, his head down. And did you discuss the cost of this surgery with anyone? Nina asked. I discussed it with his sister. Chloe, Owen said. She was the only one who attended the consultations. We estimated the out-of-pocket costs, including the retainer and rehabilitation, to be approximately $40,000. Nina walked back to the table. She picked up the red binder. Did Chloe Green establish a method to pay for this? Yes, she created the Harborstone Health Trust. Thank you. Nina turned to the commissioner. Your Honor, I am entering Exhibit A. These are the trust documents. And Exhibit B. This is the bank record showing the account balance of $41,200.50 as of November 1st. She placed the papers on the judge's bench. And Exhibit C, Nina said, her voice dropping an octave. This is the withdrawal record from November 24th. She put the document on the projector. The number blew up on the wall. Zero balance. Miles Harrow stood up. Your Honor, my clients have already admitted to accessing these funds. They acted as trusted contacts during Chloe's period of unavailability to secure family assets. This is not disputed. We dispute the reason. Mr. Harrow, Nina said, cold as ice. She clicked a button on her laptop. The screen changed. It was now a split screen. On the left was the bank transfer confirmation time, November 24th, 10:14 a.m. On the right was an email, the email from Chloe Green. Your Honor, Nina said, please look at the sender address. The commissioner leaned forward. There are 2 N's in Green, Nina said. She held up an affidavit. This is a sworn statement from Elliot Kane, the banker. He confirms that the voice verification failed. He confirms that this email was the sole authorization used to release the funds. Nina turned to Grant. This email was sent from an IP address in Briar Ridge, Pennsylvania, she said. At the exact moment it was sent, Chloe Green was logged into a secure server in Columbus, Ohio. Objection, Miles yelled. This is speculation. It is forensic fact, Nina said. We have the logs. She didn't wait for a ruling. She clicked the remote again. Now, let us look at where the money went. The screen changed again. This time, it was a flowchart. Harborstone Trust, High Desert Strategy, LLC, Silver Lark Productions, and this, Nina said, gesturing to the right side of the screen. A video started playing. It was muted, but the images were loud enough. It was the Rebirth launch video. The champagne wall, the neon sign, the drone footage, and there, in the corner of the video, was the timestamp, November 24th. Your Honor, Nina said, the petitioners claim they withdrew the money because of a medical emergency. Yet here we see the funds being used, on the same day, to pay for a luxury brand activation event for the patient who supposedly needed the money. Grant stood up. He couldn't help himself. It was family money. He blurted out. His face was red. It is all the same pot. We reallocated it for a business opportunity. Sit down, Mr. Green, the commissioner barked. Nina turned to him. She smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Reallocated, she repeated. She picked up a piece of paper from the blue binder. Your Honor, if this was a reallocation of general funds, then can the petitioner explain why the amount stolen matches, to the penny, the deposit invoice sent by Northline Medical Center for the surgery? She slapped the invoice onto the projector. Total deposit required, $41,200. The courtroom stared at the numbers. The symmetry was undeniable. It wasn't a random amount. They hadn't just taken some money. They had taken the money. They had looked at the price tag of Dylan's health and decided that was exactly how much the party should cost. Miles Harrow looked at Grant. For the first time, the smooth lawyer looked shaken. He whispered something angry to his client. Nina didn't let up. Call Detective Renee Hollis. Detective Hollis walked in. She was in uniform. She carried the weight of the state. Detective, Nina asked, did you receive a call on the night of November 29th regarding Chloe Green? I did, Hollis said. What was the nature of the call? The caller, identified as Marla Green, reported that the subject was violent, breaking glass, and threatening self-harm. And what did you find when you arrived? Hollis looked at me. She gave a small nod. I found a quiet apartment. I found a subject who was calm, rational, and organizing legal documents. There was no glass. There were no weapons. In your professional opinion, was the call legitimate? No. Hollis said, it appeared to be a retaliatory swatting attempt. Nina let that hang in the air. Retaliatory. She walked back to the table and picked up the green binder. Your Honor, the entire basis of this conservatorship is the claim that my client is paranoid. The petitioners claim she is delusional for thinking her family is conspiring against her. Nina held up the witness statements. Yet, here we have 5 affidavits, 5 different people, and yet, they all use the exact same phrase. Paranoid delusions regarding money. She put them on the screen, the words repeated over and over, a mantra of fraud. And here, Nina said, pointing to the notary stamps, these 5 people, located in 3 different states, were all notarized by the same man in Briar Ridge within a 20-minute window. She pulled out the email from Kevin Lewis. The white piece of paper looked bright under the court lights. And here, Nina said, her voice quiet and deadly, we have an admission from one of those witnesses, Kevin Lewis, who admits he was paid $500 by Grant Green to sign a statement he never read. The commissioner's head snapped up. Paid? The commissioner asked. Yes, Your Honor, bribery, subornation of perjury. Nina dropped the paper onto the table. It made a loud slap. This is not a conservatorship petition, Nina said. This is a crime scene. She turned to face Grant and Marla. We ask that the petition be dismissed with prejudice. We ask for immediate injunctive relief to unfreeze my client's assets. And we ask that the record reflect that the only instability in this room belongs to the people who would sell their son's spine to buy a party. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Grant was gripping the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He was looking at Marla. And for the first time, I saw the fear. The saint mask was gone. He looked like a man who had just realized the audit was real. He reached out and squeezed Marla's hand. He squeezed it so hard I saw her wince. She tried to pull away, but he held on, anchoring himself to her, dragging her down with him. Miles Harrow stood up. His voice was no longer smooth. It was thin. Your Honor, these are serious allegations. We need time to review these exhibits. We were not prepared for this volume of fabricated context. Fabricated? Nina laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. The timestamps don't lie. Miles. Commissioner Vance took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at the pile of binders on Nina's table. She looked at the sweaty, pale faces of my parents. We are going to take a recess, the commissioner said. I want to review these documents in chambers, specifically the notary logs and the bank transfers. She banged her gavel. 10 minutes. I sat back in my chair. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were still. I looked across the aisle. Grant was whispering furiously to Miles. Marla was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of shock. But I wasn't looking at them. I turned in my seat and looked at the back row. Dylan was sitting there. He was holding the manila folder I had given him. He was gripping it so tight the edges were bent. He looked up and met my eyes. He looked terrified. He looked like he was about to vomit. The commissioner had said 10 minutes. After the recess, Nina would call the final witness. She would call Dylan. We had destroyed Grant's story. We had proven the fraud. But to get the final nail in the coffin, to get the criminal referral that would protect me forever, I needed Dylan to say the words out loud. I needed him to choose. He looked at Grant, who was now glaring at him with a silent, heavy warning. Then he looked at me. I saw him take a breath. I didn't know what he was going to do. I had given him the map, but he was the one who had to walk through the fire. The bailiff opened the door. All rise. The 10 minutes were up. The mirror was about to turn on him. The commissioner returned to the bench. The wood of her gavel struck the sound block. A sharp crack that sounded like a bone breaking. Be seated, she said. The room settled. The air was thin, charged with the static of unsaid things. Grant was leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the commissioner, trying to use his boardroom stare to intimidate the law. Marla was looking at her lap, her fingers shredding a tissue into white confetti. Nina Carraway stood up. She did not look at her notes. She looked at the back of the room. The defense calls Dylan Green to the stand. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. I felt it in my teeth. This was it. The gamble. Dylan stood up. He looked younger than his 26 years. He looked like a boy who had been woken up in the middle of a nightmare only to find out he was still in it. He walked down the aisle. He passed Grant. Grant did not look at him. Grant stared straight ahead. But I saw his jaw muscle jump, a rhythmic ticking of rage. Dylan took the stand. He sat down. He swore to tell the truth. His voice was a whisper. "State your name for the record," Nina said. "Dylan Green." Nina walked to the center of the room. She kept her distance. She wanted him to feel alone. "Dylan," she said gently, "you heard the testimony regarding the Harborstone Trust. You heard the testimony regarding the money spent on your launch event. Yes. Did you know where that money came from?" Dylan looked at his hands. They were trembling violently now. He clasped them together, trying to hide the weakness that had cost $40,000 to ignore. "I knew it wasn't ours," he said. "What do you mean?" "I knew we didn't have that kind of cash." Dylan said, "Dad has been leveraging things for a while, moving money between accounts. But when the launch came up and Silver Lark needed the deposit, Dad said he found a reserve." "Did you ask him where this reserve came from?" Nina asked. "Yes," Dylan said. "I asked him if we could afford it." "And what did he say?" Dylan took a breath. He looked at Grant. For the first time, Grant looked back. His eyes were black holes. "He told me not to ask where the water comes from," Dylan said, his voice gaining a shred of strength. "He told me just to drink," he said. "It is handled. Don't ruin the moment with questions." "So you knew it was suspicious?" "I knew it was someone else's money," Dylan admitted. "I didn't know it was Chloe's medical fund. I swear, I thought maybe he borrowed it from a partner, or took a loan." Nina nodded. She walked back to our table. She picked up a single piece of paper. It wasn't in a binder. It was the final exhibit. The hospital letter. "I want to talk about the timeline. Dylan," Nina said, "your father testified earlier that the hospital sent the surgery notification last week. Do you recall that?" "Yes. Did you see the letter?" "No. Dad opened the mail." Nina turned to the commissioner. "Your Honor, we subpoenaed the hospital for a copy of the correspondence sent to the Green residence on November 20th. The petitioners claimed this was just a scheduling notice, a routine date." She placed the letter on the projector. "Please read the highlighted paragraph." "Your Honor." The commissioner leaned in. She adjusted her glasses. She read it out loud. Her voice was dry, devoid of emotion, which made the words sound even more horrific. "This notice serves as a final confirmation. The surgical slot for November 29th is reserved pending the receipt of the full facility deposit. If funds are not cleared by November 24th, the slot will be released to the next patient on the urgent wait list. Failure to secure this window will result in a delay of treatment of up to 6 months." The room went absolutely still. The date of the deadline was November 24th. The date of the Silver Lark wire transfer was November 24th. Nina looked at Grant and Marla. Her expression was one of pure disgust. They didn't just steal the money, Nina said to the room. They didn't just reallocate funds. They held this letter in their hands. They knew that if they didn't pay the hospital by the 24th, the surgery was canceled. They knew the deadline, and on the exact day the money was due to save their son's spine, they wired it to a party planner. She turned back to Dylan. "Did you know there was a deadline?" Nina asked. "Did you know that by spending that money on champagne, you were actively canceling your own surgery?" Dylan was crying now, silent tears running down his face. He shook his head. "No," he choked out. "No, he told me. He told me the surgery could wait. He said it wasn't urgent. He said the doctors were just trying to upsell us." The commissioner slammed her hand down on the bench. It wasn't the gavel. It was her palm. "That is enough," she said. She looked at Grant and Marla. Grant had shrunk in his seat. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man watching a building collapse on top of him. Marla was sobbing, but it was the quiet, terrified sobbing of a woman who realizes there is no manager to call. The commissioner looked at me. Her eyes were soft for a second, then they hardened into steel as she turned back to the petitioners. "I have heard enough," Commissioner Vance said. She didn't ask for closing arguments. She didn't need them. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. She ruled. There is absolutely no evidence of incapacity on the part of the respondent, Chloe Green. In fact, she appears to be the only competent adult in this family. Grant started to stand up. "Your Honor." "Sit down," Vance shouted. "I am not finished." She shuffled the papers on her bench. Based on the evidence presented, specifically the forged email headers, the fraudulent insurance claims, the subornation of perjury regarding the witness affidavits, and the willful misappropriation of funds from a medical trust, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. Marla wailed. It was a high, thin sound. Grant Green and Marla Green are hereby ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the respondent. She continued, "And I am issuing a permanent protective order. You are to have no contact with Chloe Green. You are not to access her accounts. You are not to approach her residence or her place of employment." She banged the gavel. "This court is adjourned, and may God forgive you. Because the statutes of Pennsylvania certainly will not." The room exploded into motion. The bailiff moved toward Grant and Marla, not to arrest them yet, but to ensure they stayed put while the paperwork was served. Nina turned to me. She didn't smile. She just nodded. "We did it," she said. I looked across the aisle. Grant was arguing with Miles Harrow. Marla was holding her head in her hands. I looked at Dylan. He was still sitting in the witness box. He looked lost. He looked at me, and I saw the apology in his eyes. But I also saw the fear. He knew what was coming. He knew that the party was over, and the bill was due. I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back at my parents. I walked out into the cold, gray light of the Pennsylvania afternoon. The air tasted like snow. It tasted like freedom. The consequences fell like dominoes, fast and heavy. Nina filed the protective orders within the hour. She filed the identity theft reports with the police and the Federal Trade Commission. With the court order in hand, she contacted my employer's HR department. The fraudulent insurance claims were purged from my record. My benefits were restored the next morning. But for the rest of the Green family, the unraveling was total. The criminal investigation didn't take long. When you leave a paper trail that wide, the police don't need a detective. They need a sweeper. The district attorney took one look at the fake domain registration and the shell company, High Desert Strategy, and filed charges for wire fraud and money laundering. Grant and Marla imploded. The perfect rental in Briar Ridge was the first casualty. It turned out they were 3 months behind on the rent, maintaining the lease on promises and charm. When the landlord heard about the fraud charges, the eviction notice was posted on the door. I heard from a neighbor, Sarah Miller, who retracted her statement the moment the police knocked on her door, that they left in the middle of the night. They packed what they could into the SUV and drove away, leaving the oversized candles and the linen napkins behind, their reputation. The currency they valued more than truth was ash. The story got out. Small towns talk, and court records are public. The country club memberships were revoked. The dinner invitations stopped. They were not just broke, they were pariahs. And Dylan learned the hardest lesson of all. The sponsors dropped him the day the news broke. Silver Lark Productions was subpoenaed, and the footage of the launch, the footage paid for with stolen medical funds, became evidence. No brand wanted to be associated with a kid who partied while his sister paid the price. His condition worsened. The stress accelerated the tremors. 2 weeks after the trial, he dropped a glass of water on a live stream. He tried to laugh it off, but the chat saw it. They saw the shake. They saw the fear. The comments turned cruel, as the internet always does. He called me a month later, I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later. He was crying. He said he was sorry. He said he couldn't hold a pen anymore. He said he was scared. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called Dr. Owen Vale. I set up a new account, not a trust, a direct billing arrangement. I told Owen I would pay for the surgery. I would pay for the fusion, the hospital stay, and the rehab. But there were conditions. 1. No cash goes to Dylan. Every cent goes directly to the providers. 2. Grant and Marla are banned from the hospital floor. If they show up, security removes them. 3. I am the medical proxy, not for power, but for protection. I sent the agreement to Dylan through Nina. He signed it. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a reallocation. He just signed it with a shaky, jagged scrawl that looked like a seismograph of his regret. He got the surgery. It was successful. He is walking. He is in therapy, but he is doing it alone. He is living in a small apartment in Ohio, working a retail job, learning how to be a person instead of a brand. We don't talk. We can't. The silence between us is the only safe place left. As for me, I left Briar Ridge for the last time that afternoon. I drove past the lake. I drove past the house where I had tried to be a good daughter for 34 years. I changed my number. I moved to a city where nobody knows my last name. I started a new job, one where I don't have to hide my success to keep my family from feeling insecure. I still have the binders. They are on a shelf in my closet. The red, the blue, the black, the green, the white. I keep them not as a trophy, but as a reminder. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. They ask how I could do that to my own parents, how I could prosecute my own flesh and blood. I tell them the truth. I didn't destroy my family. They destroyed themselves the moment they looked at me and saw an ATM instead of a human being. I didn't burn the house down. I just stopped paying for the fuel. I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back to see if they approved. I was just looking at the road ahead, and the road was clear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a long journey from that Thanksgiving dinner to the final verdict, and I really appreciate you sticking with Chloe until the end. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe working late like Chloe? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is around the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramas about justice and revenge, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button if you think Chloe made the right choice, and don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder to stand up for themselves. See you in the next video.